fears of Soviet mind control, bribing unwitting Americans with drugs, torturing people to find a leg up in the Cold War? Let us show you just how dark MKUltra really was. A 1984 CIA statement on MKUltra reveals that the CIA started experimenting with behavioral modification drugs out of fear of the Soviet Union. MKUltra was very much a product of the Cold War, with the experiments beginning in 1953 and ending in 1964. Supposedly. Things kicked off in earnest after the CIA gathered reports that the Soviet Union may have figured out a way to control human behavior. Being incredibly fearful of what this might mean for America, the CIA launched a similar program, MKUltra, to combat any kind of Soviet insurgents. For the CIA, the worst-case scenario was that the Soviet Union could control United States military and intelligence officials to do their enemies' bidding, or to give up top-secret information. Sure, it sounds a little bizarre today, but remember this was a terrifying time when the prospect of nuclear war felt almost imminent. Children grew up running duck and cover drills in case of a nuclear attack, and the fear of war with the Soviets was very real.
This is very unusual.
You do something, Mr. Teasdale.
This thinking drove the government to inhumanely use its own citizens as lab rats. To protect the US government and their agents against Soviet power, the CIA began trying to develop an anti-truth serum of sorts as a countermeasure to foreign interrogation. It's so much worse than it sounds. According to a Washington Post article from 1982, the program was also intended to develop an anti-interrogation drug to counter Soviet truth serum, or possibly to scramble a CIA agent's brain so that any confession to his captors would be useless. The article also clearly states the Justice Department confessed that the purpose of the CIA project was to not only modify behavior, but to, quote, release subjects from the restraint of self-control. In other words, they were looking for a total manipulation and loss of personal agency. The CIA conducted tests for MKUltra on both knowing and unknowing subjects. One group of individuals they depended upon for testing behavioral modification drugs were heroin addicts. Gets worse. According to the transcript of the congressional hearing, heroin addicts were enticed into participating in LSD experiments to get a reward: heroin. These people were incredibly vulnerable and easy to lure in, and those who were taken from the streets were probably not missed. It was the perfect setup as far as MKUltra's powers that be were concerned. Compared to heroin, LSD might seem like it's not too bad, the lesser of two evils, so to speak. Well, it's not LSD itself that's necessarily terrible, but how it was being used to influence a person's behavior while they were under the influence of the mind-altering drug. That kind of experimentation can be, and was, not just dangerous, but deadly. Case studies are nearly limitless, but the unfortunate account of Dr. Frank Olson shows just how far the CIA took their experiments. He was one of the test subjects that had no idea he was a test subject, and the results were fatal.
What was my father doing? What was the CIA doing? What happened there?
The congressional report details some of the events that led to the death of this unwitting subject, but there's a lot that's still uncertain. In 1953, Dr. Olson, a civilian employee of the Army at Fort Detrick, leaped to his death from a hotel room window in New York City, about a week after having unwittingly consumed LSD administered to him as an experiment at a meeting of LSD researchers called by the CIA. For all those conspiracy theorists out there, this one is deadly real and as terrifying as it gets. Was it the intention of the CIA to see if they could cause a person to die by suicide? Was it simply a drug trial gone too far? Either way, there's no denying that the US government caused this man's death. In 1977, the New York Times reported that the CIA enlisted over 80 institutions to conduct experiments. One such accomplice was Canada's McGill University and resident psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron. The university's daily newspaper reported on the partnership in 2012 in painful detail. According to the article, researchers would conduct experiments on some of their subjects in conditions that easily qualified as torture. At its worst, the prolonged periods of sensory deprivation and induced sleep used in the experiments left many patients in a childlike mental state, even years after the experiments were finalized. Even today, remnants of Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron's experiments at the Allen Memorial Hospital appear in torture methods at places like Guantanamo Bay.
Pacing the hall this morning, saying, "I'm just a prisoner. I feel like Jesus on the cross, can feel the nails in my hands and feet."
This was only one instance at one university, mind you. Cameron's experiments at McGill were numbered MKUltra Subproject 68, which gives you an idea of how many other subgroups tested under MKUltra's shady umbrella. The transcripts of patients' pleas, like that one from a woman named Jean Steele, are heartbreaking.
It's just like being buried alive. Somebody, please do something.
Today, MKUltra lives on in pop culture, perhaps most famously in Netflix's Stranger Things. The award-winning original series relied on many chilling government projects as source material and inspiration for its plot. Another covert government project the series borrowed from was that of Stargate, the government's research into paranormal phenomenon like mind reading and telekinesis. That's far from the only time MKUltra turns up in mainstream entertainment. The book-turned-movie The Manchurian Candidate, written by Richard Condon, was a dramatization of Project MKUltra, with a plot that subjected a U.S. citizen to a kind of brainwashing. He was, in essence, a sleeper for the Soviets that would, when the time was right, attempt to carry out assassinations under the communist agenda. In reality, the story isn't too far from the initial fears that inspired the actual CIA project. The movie The Men Who Stare at Goats was an adaptation of the book with the same name that was written by John Ronson and published in 2004. Both the book and the 2009 movie are partially inspired by Project MKUltra. So the government may have once done all it could to bury the truth of MKUltra, but a whole series of creative works drill info about it into the public consciousness today. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about world history are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.